You can now take your standards, your policies, and you can almost say, okay, how do I create a data product for X? And 80-90% of it can be done in an absolute fraction of the time that previously, again, you would have gone to your data steward and say, right, who's a data product in here? What's the definition, right? What are we trying to serve? All these questions that are the right things to do. The semantic engine does it at such a pace now that senior leaders will start to see sort of the impact of the right data governance practices, which have always been there, but they'll see them so much quicker.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, they'll see a higher level of
direct
trust.
result.
And that is purely because of the semantic engines. It's purely because of the LLMs that we are unleashing to probably compensate for human nature's inefficiencies that has always been a headwind to these kind of practices.
Hi, welcome to Data Enablers, a podcast arranged by Edgematics. My name is Sarit. I'm your host for today. And in this podcast series, we are going to talk to practitioners, experts, veterans coming from the world of data and AI. We talk to them about their journey, their experience, their learnings, their failures. We'll try to keep this conversation as candid as possible so that it remains free-flowing without any agenda, without any script. On that note, I want to welcome the guest for today, a very interesting gentleman, James Pope. How are you, James?
Very good, thank you. It's a bit cold outside, but much warmer in here.
Yes. So, James, before we start, why don't you give an introduction about yourself for the audience?
Sure.
Talk a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you. I suppose very much my data journey, if you like. I've always been very data-minded. At school, I always preferred maths over English, probably just due to my dyslexia that I'm guessing many people in our sort of line of work will relate to. But my journey probably to data leadership was an unconventional one. So post-university, once I graduated, I worked for a company called BlackRock, which is a very large asset manager. And I actually joined BlackRock again in an unconventional way. So I started off in the middle office. I was temping, managed to secure a permanent role. And then actually I worked my way up to front office. And I had about 10 years at BlackRock. And in my early 30s, I had a entrepreneurial desire to run my own organization and managed to raise some capital. So I left BlackRock thinking I had all the right ingredients to be the next sort of unicorn. It didn't quite end up that way, but I would do that all over again because it was very interesting. I think data was always at the core of what interested me, but I never quite realized the impact and importance that it was having on my career. It was almost secondary to the other things I was doing. But my startup lent heavily on sort of data. And after about 3-4 years, the organization didn't quite work. Startups are high risk. And I then sort of converted into sort of data leadership. So I left, rather than going back to asset management at the time, I sort of lent more into the data side. And from there, I found my way into a bit of consultancy. And then I was sort of headhunted for a role with a private equity-backed company in telco space, managed to raise 250 million. At that point, it was a little bit of a gold rush in the altnet space in the UK. That's where you and I first crossed paths. And that was fascinating because that took all of the experience that I had into a data space, but now in a really large organization. Right. So I'm director of data analytics and governance. And it was very much about how do we create a scalable environment. And funnily enough, I thought I knew quite a lot back then. I now reflect back 5-6 years ago and I go, gosh, there was still a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And from there, it was in telco for a number of years. I then had that decade or so in sort of like data leadership, sort of building data warehouses, quite technical as well, trying to implement sort of data mesh principles, which again, I've since learned that you can't impose it on an organization. The organization's got to be ready for it. But earlier this year, there was someone in our community, a gentleman called Peter Jackson, who, this is recorded, so I have to be very careful, but he was a little bit of a hero of mine. I looked up to him. I did the Schroders and Jackson summer school. And I remember where I first came across Peter. I read his book and Caroline's book. I think it's the CDO playbook. And I remember reading it and I went, I'm screwed. Because everything they were talking about were the challenges that many data leaders face. And here Caroline and Peter had seen it, done it, and they were relaying some of the areas that so many challenges are repeatable. And I went, it's not just me. Many other people have these challenges. So I started following Caroline and Peter from there. And then earlier this year, Peter reached out to his network and said he's now global head of data management at Schroders, FTSE 100 company, asset management, very similar to BlackRock. Well, identical to BlackRock. And he said, I've got an opportunity. I need someone who understands data leadership, operating models, data mesh, data products. And I went, big tick. It's what I've been doing the last 10 years. And I need someone who knows asset management. I went, big tick. I had 10 years at BlackRock in various roles. I really know how an asset manager works. So I reached out to Peter and I said, hey, look, I almost feel like we've got the perfect intercept here because I've got the experience in both. And we had a conversation and he offered me opportunity in Schroders. And that's where I've been for the last year or so, very much driving a data mesh operating model driven by data products, a little bit of right to left thinking about actually how do we make this accessible to consumers of data. And it's utterly fascinating, the experiences we've had over the last 12 months. And I really see the paradigm shift in this operating model and really looking forward to it. So hopefully that gave you a flavor of almost 20 years.
Wonderful introduction, James. Very interesting journey, of course. And how many people actually gets an opportunity to work with their heroes? So congratulations.
They always say don't meet your heroes, okay? But fortunately, in this case, he's all right, Peter.
I think it's definitely a very fortunate thing.
Yeah.
Not many are able to do that. Do you think it's right now, whatever is happening around us, this entire tsunami of AI and all those things, has made this probably the most interesting time to be in the data world? Do you agree to that?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. And I think it's disruptive because whenever I've looked at data management practices, they have always been very well intentioned. Logical data dictionary. So how do we collect critical data elements? How do we map lineage and relationships, right? Modeling, right? Architecture. These things always really well intentioned. But the biggest challenge has always been humans, right? Because some of the complexities of these relationships and how they express themselves in an organization that has, frankly, different objectives, right? All these practices have always been to inform an outcome for the organization that is secondary to what you're trying to do around data management. And I mean, I look at it again in the telco space. If you're being brutally honest, you boil it down to two metrics. How many homes have you connected to your network? And how many of those have you sold to? So some of the challenges when you were then talking about data management practices to inform that, okay, when you're spending £200 million a year on CapEx, digging up roads and big sort of OpEx campaigns to like drive marketing campaigns, they go, yeah, this is really important, but I've got bigger fish to fry. But you're really, really important. And to loop that back to where you are now, your question, I think the space we're going into is bridging that gap.
Absolutely.
Because all these practices that before were relying on good practitioners who were capable and had the right processes, where we're moving into in an AI space and the efficiencies and the speed that you can sort of grow some of these practices, That's bridging the gap where now you can see clear value in these activities because it remains live, right?
Correct.
Something doesn't become stale the day you've done it. It's quicker to turn these things around. And I think we're in an insanely exciting space. And I'd even go so far to say it's an existential threat to some organizations. Because if they don't understand the need to pivot to some of these practices quickly, we are in an era where other organizations will. And if these efficiencies are such a paradigm shift, for some organizations, they might respond too late.
True. I agree. And if I have to add to what you just said, before the advent of AI or AI becoming popular, I think the challenge data was facing, or the people who used to work with data, or the practices within organizations responsible for data, there was always a question, okay, if this data is not right, so what? Can I live with it? My business still runs, as you said, right? So the KPIs were two different things. You're digging the roads, laying down cables, you are getting people the connection. As long as that is happening, who cares, right? I think what has now changed with AI is when people now need outcome that they want to trust, or insights or intelligence that they can trust, they realize that while AI works very well with data which is coming from outside, public space, websites, documents, unstructured information, but you have to give it also a business context. That data is coming from within your organization. Now, if that data is not right, its quality is not right, it cannot be trusted, it is not secure, you will never be able to get the best out of the AI thing that you are doing. And then hence, probably, as you said, that people who were in the data world, people who are in the data world today, there is a new set of importance now will be given to that function, to the need, and also to the people. I mean, that's what is my belief as well, that this is probably the most interesting time as a data practitioner to be in. I mean, we have been talking about MDM, data quality, data governance for I don't know how many years. But I think the board, the senior management have started understanding and realizing the importance of these things far more than they used to do earlier, right?
Well, let me play that back. I think you're right. I think I would push back in that I think they've always understood the importance. But I think where it is now is there can actually be an honest conversation had with them because they can start to see almost ROIs. They can actually see tangible benefits. I think many senior leaders have rightfully been sold on, yes, I need my data to be trusted, therefore I need data governance practices. Yes, how do we bring in data governance? But because of the human nature, not the human nature of the people leading the programs, but then the other 98% of the people in the organization who almost feel like some of these practices are imposed upon them.
Right.
I actually feel, and I'm seeing it from my very own eyes, that that's the bridge that's being gapped. So you can create the right policies, you can create the right principles, patterns, standards for the organization, but you can now start to codify them. And actually that codifying part is the bit that historically we would have set up a meeting, we would have got our data stewards around, we would have said, right, this is what a critical data element is, and can all of the data stewards please go back to your domain, right, and try and tell me what your CDEs are, right? Sure. And we would have set up a meeting a week later, 2 weeks later, people would have come back, didn't quite get it, I think this is it, you would have iterated, you spend 6 months trying to collect a CDE. I think where we're going now with the computational data governance is all of a sudden those same things that the senior leaders are saying, yeah, this is really important. We can now, with this, now, semantic layers have been around for a long time,
right?
Okay, but I think we're moving into an era of semantic engines, and it's the pivot. A semantic layer was very much left to right? You were relying on very capable, well-informed people to build that semantic layer, to give the business reason for your metrics, your KPIs, okay? But actually, with LLMs, with the modeling of like an ontological relationships that you can start to deploy in the organization, the semantic engines end up being a little bit right to left. They actually start inferring stuff that humans have missed.
True.
They're doing it at such a pace that you can now take your standards, your policies, and you can almost say, okay, how do I create a data product for X? And 80-90% of it can be done in an absolute fraction of the time that previously, again, you would have gone to your data steward and say, right, who's a data product in here? What's the definition, right? What are we trying to serve? All these questions that are the right things to do. The semantic engine does it at such a pace now that senior leaders will start to see sort of the impact of the right data governance practices, which have always been there, but they'll see them so much quicker.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, they'll see a higher level of
direct
trust.
result.
And that is purely because of the semantic engines. It's purely because of the LLMs that we are unleashing to probably compensate for human nature's inefficiencies that has always been a headwind to these kind of practices.
Correct.
And that bridge, I think, is being removed rapidly.
No, I 100% agree. Like, as you said, right, it was earlier difficult for some of the senior managers or the management or the board to see ROI coming out of data governance. So data governance was more of a enabling thing, more of a hygiene or things like that. But now it is not just hygiene. It is far beyond that. And that is something that senior management boards are now realizing and are mandating in them. So that takes me to another question I have in my mind. How important is culture to make data work for an organization? I mean, you have seen so many different places with this 20 plus years of your journey in data. Mm-hmm. Technology, I know it's important, and I'm sure that we'll have time to talk about that too. Expertise, yes. But what about that organization's culture, the tone at the top of the management, how important it is to drive success?
It's utterly fundamental, isn't it? And I don't think anyone would be surprised to hear that. I mean, culture is critical in anything we do, even beyond data, right? I mean, there's many case studies around what culture does to an organization, and there's probably, it's no secret that many consultants are always brought in to understand how you can drive a sustaining culture. So I do have a very keen interest in this sort of set of activities. I mean, I've had experiences reporting into multiple CEOs, COOs, CFOs over the last 6-7 years or so. And I mean, on a personal level, I can reflect back on the CEOs. There was one CEO who once turned around to me and said, I don't understand your world, but I know how important it is. How do we be great? And I chuckled and I went, what a wonderful thing to say. And I said, not many people often challenge me to think bigger. Actually, people are often trying to wind me in a little bit. And he said, no, however big you're thinking, think bigger. And I vividly remember that because I've never come away more empowered.
Right.
And we did some really good stuff. I've also can remember, and I have to be very careful how I express this, and it was C-suite, so I'm going to keep this generic, and we might cut it out later, who knows. But I do remember someone once sat me down, and we were in a very complex situation, and they weren't a data person at heart. And there's no criticism of that.
That's okay, yeah.
And I was explaining something really complex and how we had to solve something, which was a huge, huge part of the organization. It was like a real big, it was the engine of the organization. So it was the right conversation to have. And I was explaining it, and after about 10, 15 seconds, they went, you're going to want to stop talking now because I'm about to get really effing angry, right? And it was said with quite some certainty. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, oh my God. And this wasn't said in a way to challenge me to say, look, how can we think of it from a different way? And those two different scenarios created very different culture.
Correct.
And you won't be surprised to understand one created a really lovely outcome, another less so. And culture is key. The reason why I was a little bit hesitating as well, because culture historically has been key because you want to influence people and you want to take people on a journey and you want to give people purpose, identity, and an understanding of what they're doing, right?
True.
People are really, really busy. The reason why I was a little bit hesitating is because when you ask me out questions like, is culture now going to become less important? Because culture used to be an expression of our way to communicate data management practices within the business to create a higher level of trust. But if we're now going to bed that part into the LLMs, the semantic engine, where actually the semantic engines can start to infer concepts, is culture actually going to be less important? And I never thought I'd say that. And this is literally me thinking up on the spot, because culture is key. But it's an interesting one to play around with, where if we are going to move into an era where AI and agentic frameworks are going to do 90% of the process that we needed to almost rely on that cultural communication to take people on the journey, I mean, it will be as important as ever, let's face it, because it's still important to have the right sort of relationships. It's still important to have the right identity, the right purpose to get people to buy into it. So it's always going to be as important. So I've almost just answered my own question.
No, but I think you said something extremely important and thought-provoking, because as you said, right, that, I mean, in our childhood, everybody used to tell us, be a hard worker, be a hard worker. And it's still said, right? But sometimes I now think that with the power of things like AI and all, I want AI to do the hard working for me. More than being just a hard worker, I would rather try to focus on being smarter worker, right? If 70% of my time was being taken to do something else or to do a lot of hard work, and which left me with very less time during the day to think about something else. And if AI can does that hard working for me, I will rather be smart and try to do two or three different things, challenge myself continuously, and be a far more productive person than what I was. And what you are saying is now something very similar, that instead of culture driving it, if culture can be embedded as a part of AI, a large part of that problem probably gets solved. But yes, I agree. I believe that still the tone at the top has to be very important. The person who's at the helm of the organization or any kind of business unit or business has to know that, tell people that anything that you do should be data-driven. But if it has to be data-driven, then it also has to be the right kind of data, right? So you cannot just look at anything and create an inference. You need to know what to pick up, whether to trust it or not, and then only you can take a inference. So that part will probably always remain, but maybe it will be done differently going forward. But yeah, it's really, really thought-provoking.
Well, I've got a great example of something you're just talking about there. So obviously driving a data product operating model at the minute, what we are thinking is right to left rather than left to right? So a data product, there's lots of conversations around what a data product is. I go to lots of round tables, and actually the level of ambiguity.
May I stop you once? Yeah. Very, very sorry about that. And there's a reason why I said that. You have picked up a very important thing called data products. For the less initiated, would you like to first give your perspective of what do you call a data product, and then move on to what you were about to talk about? Sorry for the interruption, but I thought that it's important.
It is important because, again, I think there's a lot of ambiguity sometimes.
Correct.
And I mean, I suppose because of my career sort of trajectory, I do think a lot more right to left. I'm not a pure technician. right? I'm not going to sit by myself for 3 weeks and build you a warehouse, right? I can do that, but the way my brain and experience is, I do think a little bit more from a business lens. So I've got less of a technical answer to what is a data product, right? Because fundamentally, in my view, a data product can almost be anything you want it to be, as long as it's got ownership. Okay, so let's just say it's a simple pipeline, all right, that leads into some sort of tables and views. Okay, what makes the data product a data product is that it has ownership, and we see that through a data product owner. Okay, and the data product owner ultimately has 6 responsibilities, right? First of all, to describe what a data product is. Okay, and we always liken it to IKEA, right? So I know if I go to IKEA and I want a bed is a product. And I can see if I want a king size bed, a queen size bed, different types of wood, different designs. That is described to me as a product, okay? And it's the same with a data product. First of all, I'm describing what this asset is, okay? Second of all, it's managed. And we consider this in terms of sort of like a software development lifecycle. It's a little bit DevOpsy. So we are talking a little technical language there.
That's fine.
But what I mean by that is, again, if this is managed, if I worked in IKEA and actually I realized that I was serving a population that was all 6'8", I need to manage my product accordingly and make longer beds. Okay, this is what I'm doing with a data product. As a data product owner, I'm understanding what my business data and use cases are in the organization, right? Because a data product will serve use cases. And this is the paradox of data products. When you hear of a data product operating model, you think you want the largest number of data products. You actually want the smallest number of data products to serve the largest number of business data and use cases. Because again, if I'm thinking about IKEA, I don't want 50 different beds. If I can put out 5 different beds that serve 90% of the population, it's going to be much better for me.
Again, being smarter.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where the productization thinking comes in around these curated data sets. You then want it trusted. Now, this is where we talk about the classic data quality, data lineage, sort of like how do we start codifying practices? But the element of trust comes in through data governance. So that is implicitly sort of fundamental to it. Another one is it's controlled. And what we mean then by it's very much access control, okay? So again, if I've got a product, I need to make sure that the product is accessible by the right people, okay? When we start talking about data, we obviously got classifications, sort of like sensitive data, PII, etc. We have to make sure that if anyone is making a request to access that they are suitable to see that data.
Right.
And again, this is where the data product owner, because they are fundamental in all these pieces. Another one is that it can be discovered. This is when you start to think to yourself in terms of a data marketplace. Okay, how do I bring consumers and producers together?
How does people know it exists?
Precisely. And this is where your IKEA analogy grows further, because your data marketplace becomes your IKEA. It becomes a place where if I'm in a business and I want to know FX rates, or if I'm in a telco business and I want to know how many homes we have passed, which is basically how big the network is, okay? If I was in an organization of 6,000 people, if you know any person at any one time could drop into your data marketplace, understand where that data is, and everyone's using the same figure, right? How powerful is that? Because how many times do we see someone's got a spreadsheet over there, someone's told me this number, I pick up the phone and they go, oh yeah, I've got this over here. And all these numbers are different, right? But instead, if you have a data marketplace, one place to go to for a key metric that is owned, described, managed, trusted, discoverable, then actually you're looking at a piece of data that now has all these traits that cover what goes in to allowing everyone to discover that one same piece of data. So then when they're doing their analysis operationally, all of a sudden it's aligned. Right. And the last one, and this is absolutely key, and I still see this on stage all the time. I've been to some good events recently, and part of the challenge of our world is there are still so many technicians out there. And it's really important because data products are a technical output, okay? But a lot of people still miss the final trait, which it needs to be consumable, right? And you can put all this great work into creating the curated data set. But if you think of like your bell-shaped curve and you think of a normal standard deviation, right? I always think of a 2x2 grid, right? Along the bottom, you have almost data literacy, low to high, can write SQL, can't write SQL. And then up the top, along the top, you've got along the side, upside, you have understanding of data products, right? I know what a data product is. I don't know what a data product is. If you're in a top right box, you've typically got a chance to access a data product. If you're in either the top left or bottom right box, right, you can probably work your way around it. If you're in the bottom left box, low data literacy skills, low understanding of data product, but you still have a business outcome that can be informed by accessing this. Correct. So many people are left abandoned in that box, even though they are probably part of the U-shaped curve where the distribution is. True. So what you have to think about in terms of a data product is, can it also be consumed? And if you pull those 6 things together, it leads into something that we're referring to as a COPE ratio, create once, publish everywhere. And all of a sudden you've got curated, trusted data products that are repeatable, automated, with all these sort of practices built into it, that then the entire organization can then consume with ease. True. And some of the key metrics we will look at is time to consumption. So how quickly does it take for someone having an interest in a data set to then passing through all the gates of access control, passing through the gates of maybe getting access to Snowflake if that's a warehouse, getting through the gates of, okay, well, I want to take it into Power BI. And if I'm in that bottom left box, I don't know, I can just about open Power BI, but I know you've got something that I can pull into here. What's the time to consumption? And this is where we go back to the things we were talking about earlier, where like these agentic frameworks are going in, because that all of a sudden will reduce time to consumption. It will reduce time to production of a data product. So actually you start having a proliferation of data products where rather than building 40 a year and hoping those 40 work, you can now build 100. You can let 40 fail because the market tells you what is deemed to be useful to an organization, because you look at telemetry data. And then through that whole a data product is managed in the software development lifecycle, data product owner goes, well, you know what? There's less friction to create the data products. We can now look at the telemetry data and realize these ones aren't being consumed. And because we're managing it under a lifecycle, we retire them. Right. And actually, you've now got 100 data products you can build in a year, and you let the market decide.
Whether there is a consumption, there's a need, there's a demand for it.
Absolutely. And in almost any market that anyone trades in, you can do all the focus groups, all the market research, but until you launched a product, you never realize. So if you become too technical with the focus of what is a data product, and you go down the route of build it, they will come, right? Want to pivot that. And that's almost how we see a data product, right? So described, managed, accessed, trusted, discovered, and consumed. And if you get those 6 things, for me, it's the ownership of what that data is that makes it a data product, rather than, is it AWS? Is it Azure? Right? Is it Kafka? No, that doesn't matter. It's what is it in the eyes of a consumer? And the consumer wants a product that if I walk into IKEA, I know the size of the bed, I know the number of years guarantee it's got on there. And you know what? I know what that product is. It fits my need, because otherwise I'm sleeping on the floor.
Correct. No, I mean, so true. I loved what you said so far, especially the last point about consumption or consumable, right? That so often that we have seen, James, that we created a fantastic data set. There's a marketplace through which you can discover it, probably very secure, has a ownership, but I can't get my hand to that. The path or the process to get that data, because it's all fine till the time I see, okay, there is a definition. But if I'm not able to use it myself, what's the point? So if you cannot make that consumer's life easy in not only finding it, discovering it, and trusting it, but also actually using it, it might be an asset, but not a product. I think that clears a lot of confusion that people have in their mind, because in the conversations that I have with people, and again, at various state of their maturity, I think that definition is yet not very clear. There is a confusion between what you just called a data asset, right? Every piece of data in an organization, if it has got a value, is an asset. But whatever is an asset may or may not be a product from a consumer mindset. To make it a product, all the things that you just said has to be applied to it to call that a product.
Exactly. Yeah. And look, there are still technical requirements in order to, like we have to make sure that a data product for us is realized in the schema. So once it's in the schema in Snowflake, we can then connect it up to Calibra, and ultimately it will pull through the metadata and people will understand what is contained within that data product. So there are still really fundamental and there's really reliable practices that still remain true. But it is interesting that we're now still talking about data products, but the biggest part of this equation for me still remains the business data and use case. So a lot of the market will have a conversation of what a data product is. I still see very few conversations about this next element. And what we're trying to do is understand what is our business data and use case, right? And again, you could call it a business use case if you needed to, but we happen to refer to it as a business data use case. And this is actually where we go out into the organization and we have certain governance forums so we can make sure we've got a domain-driven design. Every domain will have a data working group. And a main purpose of this data working group is to bring and then you almost think of it like your node kind of sort of hub and spoke kind of thing anyway, right? So these data working groups bring in the SMEs around their functions. And a big part of it is to say, what are your use cases? All right. But also not what is your use case in terms of if you give me this data set, it's more reliable, it's more accurate. We need to report this to a regulator. So we need to make sure we know what the domain over there is saying. So actually we report the same number. It's not just describing what is your use case and requirement for that data. It's also putting, where possible, a pound value on it. Now, this is much easier in some cases because often it is look, it's impossible to say how much this is worth to the business because it's a form of efficiency. You could tie yourself in knots, and I've tried to do this in the past, and sometimes it works better than others. So you've got to read the room. But you could almost go, I no longer have to do that piece of Excel work for 2 hours every day, and we're going to say that's £50 an hour. Therefore, we can say it's an annual improvement of efficiency of 20, 30,000, whatever it turns out to be. You go, okay, I can put a value on that because then I can say that this use case might be worth £20,000 and I look at the data product, I know that's going to cost £10,000 a year. Actually, that's a return, an ROI of 2 to 1, right? Sure. Actually, I can now take this example to senior leadership and say, hey, look, we are demonstrating a return on our value. That value conversation is a really, really, really hard one to have. Every now and then you land on some absolute classic ones where it's literally, we have no way to access this data. If you unleash that, it's worth X to us because now we can report on it. Or I work in a regulated environment. It allows us to report better data to regulators. That sometimes means that we might not have to hold as much money on the balance sheet, which is a direct cost of capital benefit to us because actually we don't have to hold that. We can invest it elsewhere. So every now and then you stumble across these absolute beautiful ones where it's a real clear, do this, you get that, and the benefits are massive.
Right.
They are few and far between. So understanding the value to a business data use case is much harder. However, still collect the use cases, because what you can then do, and we do this in our data marketplace, is we collect all the use cases and we can map them to a data product. So now we can start seeing how important these data products are because they're serving a higher number of use case. And a big part of our equation is working really, really hard to collect the use cases, to actually have a right to left conversation where, first of all, we collect a use case and you've got 3 outcomes. You go, amazing. There's already a data product that exists over there. You never knew it existed. Let's get you access. It could be a data product exists over there, but it's not quite in the shape that you don't have, right? You might need persisted data. You might need a few extra attributes, right? But what we can now do is go to the data product owner and say, hey, we've got this use case. This is what it's worth to us. Because this is managed by you, can you now expand your data product to serve us? Not a problem, right? Because people are incentivized to. Or you can go, there's no data product to serve this at all. So let's build one, right? And then when we build it to serve our purpose, maybe people discover it in the marketplace, and in the future that one expands as well. So it's very much a right to left view of what a business data use case is. And actually we come full circle here, because where we started this conversation is what we do in the organization at the minute is if someone requests access to a data product, they explain why. They say, this is my use case. We then jump on a call with them, and it can last 5 minutes, it can last half an hour. But I literally say, we use Copilot, Microsoft House, and I say, tell me about your use case. In the past, I've written loads of notes down. I would have tried to get into the head, tried to make sure I get the relationships right. What I now do is I kick back, put on the transcript, and I have a conversation like you and I are. I don't have to think about writing anything down. And it can go in any direction, but it's just almost like a therapist. Tell me your problems, right? And they share what their use case is. At the end of the call, I go, thank you very much, put it down. I take that transcript. I've written a prompt that basically says, you are a data product owner. Think about it like this. Can you articulate what this use case is for me? And we can now turn, and obviously the LLM will then read the transcript, answer it for us. Human in the loop will still review it. But that process of writing up the call afterwards, getting the right language, like I said earlier, dyslexic, so sort of the language can sometimes be a bit of struggle for me. Post that call where I can have a conversation based on my experience, asking the right questions to elicit from them, to finishing that call, downloading the transcript, putting it into an LLM. I got my business use case in about 5 minutes. Now, if you think that used to take 2-3 hours, right? Maybe half an hour if it was like a short one. They're hours worth of savings every single time we find a use case. Yeah. And we've come across probably about 15 use cases in the last 6 weeks. Look at the time savings between those two. Yeah. And the LLM output is written far more coherently than I could ever wish for, and far more succinctly. And
then not only that, I mean, I think even if it has got mistakes, but the baselining is done. For you, right?
So you can see how it's making its way into our operating model. It's allowing us to find more use cases quicker. It's allowing us to map them to data products in a better way. It's a right to left view, and all driven by those semantic engines, all that ability of the LLMs to start summarizing the calls quicker than we could ever imagine, which allows me more time to go and collect more use cases. So you can see where the gains are happening right in front of our own eyes.
That was a super answer. And that takes me to one more thing that I've been wondering or thinking about, right? Experience. We talked about consumers, right? Now, we keep talking about customer experience. Most often when we refer to customer, we mean customers who are the end customers of a bank or a telco and all those things. But what about the people within the organization who are working with data? Because when you talk about data product and consumers, and if you ever do a plotting of who those personas are, you will see most often, most of the consumers of those data products are probably people within the organization who needs to do something with that data to generate something else, right? To you as a practitioner, how important it is for you as a person, as an individual, where you believe that one of my endeavors is to make the experience of our employees better. At the HR person, the finance person, the ops person, whoever they are, what's your perspective?
For me, And I do wonder whether this sometimes creates an advantage because they are the most important people for me. And I love, like, I was having a conversation with our head sort of enterprise architect yesterday about Iceberg. Okay, so I love architectural patterns. I love the technical side. I really, really do. Polyglot storage we were discussing. Is it important to be agnostic natively in terms of where things are stored? Those things are important, but to answer your question, the most important people are the people in the business, because we are there to enable them. We are there to help serve them in a way that they can create efficiencies, can make better decisions, and they are the people we need to think about. So I absolutely think, and they are the most important people in this, not to diminish other people's importance, but it's a means to an end. And a lot of them do sit in this bottom left box that I refer to and can sometimes be forgotten. So I do think it's important. How do we reflect that? Typically, we've got a framework. Why wouldn't you? And when we consider our data products from a governance perspective, which is important for the consumers, we've got sort of like a pyramid, right? So we've got L0s all the way up to L3s. And basically an L0 data product is a really light set of governance practices, because as a consumer, I probably know actually it's my own data set and I'm comfortable if it's wrong, or well, I wouldn't want it to be wrong, but if it's wrong, it doesn't have an impact to me. But actually, as I move up the pyramid, right, you might have an L3 data product that is driving consumption from an external regulator. Boy, you better get that data set bang on, right? Because ignorance is not an excuse. So actually, once you get to that L3, right, you've got such deep and broad governance practices built into that to make it the most trusted data set. Of course, you're not going to have many of those because you don't want to overplay your hand and put so much excessive governance practice around something that if I'm using it for myself and if it's wrong, I know where it's wrong so I can go and correct it. Obviously, as you move up the pyramid, right, you have less cases for a data product and the excess or the greater level of governance activities around it. And the reason I say that is when we think about the consumers, of which you're right, the vast majority in my space are internal, but we've got a lot of external consumers who will still be taking these data products, or certainly taking a function of those data products to give them some form of answer, like a regulator. And the levels of the data product help the consumer know what they're looking at. Right. So again, if I want to buy a car, right, if I want utter guarantee that the car is going to be reliable, if something goes wrong, it's going to be fixed, right, I'm probably going to go to a forecourt and buy straight from the dealer, maybe on finance. Okay, you know what? If anything goes wrong, they've got it, right? If I'm like, you know what? I just need a little bit of a run around. If it goes, I'll fix it. I'll go and buy a second-hand one on Auto Trader, turn up and just pray that it doesn't break down on me. But as a consumer, I can make the decision.
Right.
Okay. And as a consumer, I don't know an awful lot about cars. All right. I personally can still make a decision. Do I risk it on Auto Trader or do I go and buy it straight from the dealership? Right. But I can have that choice because I know what I'm buying. And it's the same with data products. They're not all equal. But if you can create an operating model, a culture, an understanding that as a consumer, irrespective to where I work in the organization, if I know what I'm buying, then that's good enough for me. And if I worked in HR and I had to report something externally and it had to be right, I can understand that I need an L3. And if an L3 doesn't exist for that, then I make a case to build it into an L3. But as a consumer, it gives me a picture to know not all these are equal, and actually I can select the appropriate one for me.
True. And then, as you said, that there's one of the thoughts that I also do have is, if I really, really want to make my end customer happy, instead of trying to do things directly for him or her. I also empower the people in between, the bank teller who's serving a customer, the salesperson who's talking to that customer, the customer service agent who's talking to that customer. If we can make or improve their experience, give them tools, give them capabilities which are far better, they in turn will also make the end customer happy. And then you're putting a collective effort, not just one effort that, hey, I give my end customer a fancy website, easy to use website, but every touch point that the customer has with these people, they're all getting similar kind of an experience. And I mean, I can't exactly remember the term that we used to use of that unification of that experience. It's just not coming to me right now. But that's the utopia that you ultimately get to. One more thing that also comes to my mind, regulations. And I know I'm probably going to ask something which does not have a straight answer. But I still want to hear your personal perspective. Regulations, does it stop people from innovating, or it's needed?
Oh, well, it is interesting. Okay. I think it's going to drive innovation. And I'll tell you why. Because regulators in any market now know organizations should have access to better data. And regulators will, in my view, historically have probably had to do quite light touch or high level because they know that organizations would struggle to accurately report. Now, of course, there are certain things that organizations have to report to a real big depth, but regulators probably realized they couldn't overburden organizations with too much. Data is becoming far more reliable because of a lot of practices we've talked about. So why would regulators now not ask more? Because if you've got a semantic engine that I've already demonstrated one example of our business data and use cases where we are saving a huge amount of time. If you've now got semantic engines that can almost say, okay, I need to answer this, and it can be done in a fraction of a time, what is stopping a regulator turning around to you and go, we're now going to ask for more? And actually, we're not just going to ask for more high-level stuff. We're going to get into a little bit more nuance because regulators are there for a purpose. And if it empowers them to impose more demands fairly on an organization, and you've got the right architecture, environment, process, operating model to answer those questions more reliably, right? It works for everyone. Because if you're an organization doing the right things and you want to continue your level of business and you can demonstrate to the regulator that you're fully compliant with all their demands and you can do it in a trusted way, okay, that starts creating a bit of a competitive advantage. Because if I can look my customers in the eye and say, we've got robust regulatory requirements, but we're answering them at pace and are fully compliant, but maybe my competitors down the road are struggling, okay, because they can't keep up. Well, first of all, that gives you an indication that we are doing business the right way, but it might also give you an indication that the way we are operating allows us to do that. And if we're doing that for the regulators, imagine what we're doing for you as a customer and as a client in our approach to business. Trying not to make that too personal to any organizations I work for. But I think that message can be taken across the board.
Right. Very interesting. James, I love this conversation. And I'll wait for the next one where we can continue from this, go into other topics. But as much as I love this conversation, I'm sure that you guys must have loved this conversation too. When you talk to some people, you can feel the passion that they have in this subject. I thought of once asking you this question, that do you love being in data? I don't need to ask that question anymore. Thank you for being a patient listener. We'll come back to you once again with another episode talking about a similar topic or something different around data and AI with another guest. Thank you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.